This is awesome. My phone is just waiting on Scott. Keeps pausing. Not pausing on my end. All right, I hear Scott.
Pausing on your
end. There he is.
end?
Oh, you sound a bit staticky. Where are you at?
Same spot I was.
Okay, no, that's better. Now you're clear. It just took a second. It just took a second. Well, I'm going to pop a beer.
Yeah, I got mine.
This is
Next.
it might be a little shaking on mine. Huntfish Ferment says she's choppy. It's not choppy on my end. It's not choppy. Is it choppy on your end, Scott?
Just looking at you is a little choppy.
Yeah, but as long as my voice comes through, that's well, really, it's all about you. I don't really give a rat's rear end if I'm choppy or not. I'm just pouring my beer, and we'll let people trickle in. Welcome to everyone who's joined to what I think is the first. I think this is the first Oregon BHA Instagram Live. I even got my little BHA cup going on. Oh yeah, what are you drinking, Scott?
A little rum and coke, the big cup.
All right, we'll go with rum and coke. I pulled out some Culmination Brewing. At least they're local.
A little shy on whiskey today.
Well, shoot, man, I could have helped you out. I have plenty in the larder. I almost
I need it after today. I was on the lower Deschutes for all day, and it was really nice down there, but my allergies kicked my butt today.
Oh, geez. All right, I'm going to actually pull up this live on my computer as well so that I can. I'm going to mute it though. That way, what I can do is I can see the questions as they come in, and rather than scrolling up and down. So afterwards, when we have Q&A, I can kind of scroll it through. John Lowry says, "Wow, going with the big guns." I think he means you and me. I think I'm more like a 243.
I don't even know what I would be.
I'm not as small as a 22 long rifle, but I'm definitely not a big gun. Oh, he meant the rum and coke is what he says. Oh, he says the rum and coke. Okay, well.
Oh yeah, I got the big guns here for that for sure.
That's
yeah, the old Yeti cup.
Oh, well, what are you, John? You can type it in there if anything. John just he's a busy man. He's all over the board. So. Well, we got 7 people on. I figure I'll wait just a few more minutes, 6 or 7, Scott, and then we'll just have you go through, kind of bear hunting, predator hunting, and what your specialty background are.
We'll dish out a little information and then some questions.
Yeah, but just was going to let people trickle on at least for a few moments. It's 6:01 right now. Give it like another minute or two, and then,
Okay.
Oh, Carla joined, I see, and I don't know who that is. It's bad when I don't know. I'm just like, I don't know who the member is. But yeah, okay, so Carla joined. That's good. I know she wanted to. She's met you before.
Yep.
And she says hi.
Well, hi.
Hi. If you haven't, everybody, if you drink, grab yourself a pint or a glass or whatever, pull up the couch. I believe this is Oregon BHA's first live Instagram. Oh, you can't see my deer very well. I'm going to show off my deer. There we go. Oh, yeah. I just love seeing that every day. That makes me happy.
Yeah, I'm kind of in a dungeon. I'm in a dungeon right here, like concrete building. I thought I'd throw in a few skulls just to liven it up a little.
You got some cool skulls behind you. But,
yeah, just a couple record book skulls there.
All right, well, it's 6:02. I'd say, go ahead and get started. I mean, people may trickle in, but I'm sure it'll still be helpful as we go along. But let me give you a quick introduction.
All right, well, I just want to...
Let me give you a quick introduction again. Some people may not have, heard before what we were doing or read all the stuff online. And Brad says, hi, Brad. So, yeah, this is Oregon BHA's, as far as I know, first live Instagram with Scott Napoli. Scott will introduce his background in a minute, but I know Scott from a few years ago through a number of organizations in ODFW, but he is one heck of a predator hunter, and so we invited him online to talk about bear and spring bear, especially since it is spring bear season. And with that, I'll just let him take it away.
Okay, well, I just want to welcome everybody. I think this is my first, so to speak, seminar online. I've done lots in public, but I'm just going to, first I want to thank Oregon BHA for inviting me. And those of you out there that are not members of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, I really encourage you to look into doing that. Whether you are a hunter or a fisherman, you don't have to be either one. If you enjoy your public lands, biking, hiking, and everything else, and your public waterways, then I would encourage you to join up because they're fighting for our right to keep public lands public and access to the lands and waters. So I would encourage you to do that. So I'm basically going to go through maybe 20 minutes, just kind of give out some information, a little like knowledge of bears. We'll talk a little bit about field judging. We'll talk about some methods of hunting, and just a little bit some basic gear and stuff. So I'm just going to start with bears are pretty solitary animals. When you see a lot of bears together, it's usually because there's an abundant food source nearby. They live up to 10, 20, even 30 plus years. I think the record is 39 in the wild, so that's a pretty old bear. They swim well. They like to run. Well, they will run. They don't really like to run because they're lazy, but they will run up to 30 miles an hour. And when I was a kid, I somehow either was told or read that if you got chased by a bear, that you should run downhill, because apparently the theory was that their legs are a little bit short, so running downhill too fast might trip them up and cause them to tumble. But I can tell you that I've seen a lot of bears run downhill, and I'm pretty sure they're going to run faster than me. So if you get chased by a bear, just make sure your friend is slower than you are. Bears reproduce every 2 years, so they'll typically have 2 cubs, but they can have as little as 1 and up to 6 or more. Their cubs are usually weaned within 6 to 8 months, and then they stay with mom for about 18 months. So it's a lot like mountain lions where they stay with mom. And sometimes if you see a group of bears, you might be looking at a bunch of siblings, older siblings with their mother. They have their navigation ability is superior to ours. They have excellent long-term memory, and their brain in proportion to their body is fairly large. So when it comes to bears and their hearing, they exceed the human frequency ranges and have twice the sensitivity. Excuse me.
Bless you.
And their eyesight's not real great, but it is they can see in color, and it's fairly good when they're up close. And then the big one is their smeller, their nose. That's their biggest defense. And I don't even know that their limits. I think their limits are untested as far as how well they smell. But we do know that their nasal mucosa is 100 times larger than ours. So I take scent control very serious when I'm bear hunting. So that's something that if you don't do, I would consider strongly doing that when you're bear hunting. I hope there's some new hunters here or some new bear hunters. And you want to know that bears are opportunistic eaters, so they pretty much eat everything and anything from plants, roots, grasses, nuts, berries, honey, fish, mammals, carrion, and they will kill, animals like elk calves and deer fawns and such. Some of the basic gear that you're going to want to have, besides your rifle or your bow, is going to be a good set of binoculars. A lot of guys are spot and stalking bears. I do a lot of that. So a good set of binoculars, when I say good set, I mean it's worth the investment, putting a little extra money into a good set of binoculars, because if you're going to sit on some glass for 5-6 hours glassing for bears, you don't want to fatigue your eyes that fast with a cheap pair of binoculars. Another good tool is a spotting scope, especially if you want to try and field judge a bear from a distance. A spotting scope is a good tool to have. I like to use a rangefinder, especially if you're in these canyons. Like I'm going to be heading to Hell's Canyon next week to bear hunt, and over there, if any of you have been there, it's pretty good country, and it's hard for me to judge distance when you're shooting across a canyon at a bear. So it's good to have a good rangefinder. We'll talk a little bit about two-way radios a little later, but that's another item I would recommend. And then, of course, your preference of weapon as far as rifle or archery. I generally use a 30-06 for killing bears. Most of us like to go out and pre-scout an area if we're going somewhere hunting, regardless of what animal it is we're looking for. But, there's times where you just don't, for example, going to Snake River, you're looking at 6-7 hour drive, and so there's a lot of times you don't have time to go scout an area. So that's where your online research comes in handy, your phone calls to the local biologists, and even to people that know the area can kind of give you some direction on maybe some spots to go. But ultimately, when you get there, you're going to be looking for sign. And so some of the sign, of course, first is the food source. So this time of year in the spring, bears are like cattle. They're just out grazing constantly. So you're looking for fresh grass and plants that are growing typically on the south-facing slopes. That's where you're going to find a lot of bears just grazing like cattle. Of course, you're going to look for other sign like scat. This time of year, with them grazing on grass and plants and stuff, you're going to find their scat is pretty much this black, like greasy, and you might even see vegetation in it. You'll also see old scat from the fall. Like last week I was turkey hunting and we saw a bunch of old scat, and it's different because it had a different food source in it, so berry seeds and acorns. So you'll be able to tell the difference between some really old and fresh scat. Obviously looking for tracks when you're out there. If you're getting down into the woods and the trees and stuff, be looking for scrapes on some of those trees, especially along trails. And then if you're getting down in some of the deeper canyons and draws and thicker stuff, it doesn't have to be thick stuff, just has to be down in some of these deeper draws. You'll find some bear beds. And the thing about bear beds is, in my experience anyway, is a lot of times bears are kind of lazy. So they'll go to bed, they'll nap, they'll go eat, they'll come back. And but when they're in their bed, a lot of times they're just, if they have to go to the bathroom, they just step out of their bed and barely go a few feet and drop a bunch of poop. So if you see a bunch of fresh sign around their bed, then you probably got an active bed that they're using regularly. I've actually found one bear that was bedded down at the time that I found it. So that does happen. Another good tool is your trail cams. Obviously, your trail cams are showing you what's out there when you're not there. And one thing I would recommend with trail cams is using something in the background of your picture of your camera for judging the size of an animal. For example, I'll put a camera facing, so basically perpendicular to a trail, so that the bear walks across the front of the camera, and then I'll use a tree or whatever's there to judge the size. You'll be amazed the difference, because they're usually going to be on the trail. So you'll be amazed the difference you see between a cub or a sow, even a sow and a boar. It's amazing the difference in just the height of their back. So those are that's a good tool to have, obviously. So when it comes to spot and stalk bear hunting, like I said, look for that food source. Look for those open areas. I like to pick a good top of a hill where I can see a bunch of different hills with a lot of open space in them with that grass growing. And then I like to pick those that some cover nearby, because a lot of times those bears, like I said, they're pretty lazy. They'll come out and eat, and it could be the middle of the day. They'll go back, nap, and they'll get hungry again, come back out and eat. So you don't, the thing about bear hunting in spring is sometimes you don't even have to get up super early if you don't want to, and sometimes those bears don't even come out till 10 o'clock in the morning anyway. So they're just pretty much in and out whenever they want. One thing about spot and stalk, though, is try to have a plan on how you're going to get to that bear, because the nice thing about looking across a canyon is you can see all the rim rock and the cliffs. But if you're looking on the same side of a canyon, you a lot of times cannot see those rim rocks and those cliffs. And so that's the nice thing about looking across a canyon. The bad thing about it is getting over there after a bear when you see one. So trying to figure out a plan on how you're going to execute getting over there as quickly as you can. And then the reason I bring up two-way radios is it's really nice to have a spotter. So if you spot a bear, have that person that's with you dedicate their glass to that bear and watch it while you go over and try to get in on it. The majority of the time, I think almost every time I've ever gone after a bear, it's always moved by the time I got there. And I'm hustling, running down ridges and stuff. And they're just, most of the time, they're going to move. So, and your spotter's not always going to be able to see where they went. Sometimes they lose it out of sight, but sometimes they can give you a direction. But regardless, there's a lot of patience involved when it comes to spotting bears and glassing bears. And then there's also, you have to have persistence. When you go after a bear, you've already committed to going in there. You get down there, you don't find it where it was. make a decision. If you don't know which way it went, just make a decision. And a lot of times the lay of the land is gonna, designate that for you because, like I said, bears are kind of lazy. So generally, unless it gets spooked, it's gonna take an easy route. So that's spot and stock pretty much. And like I said, it's really nice to have a spotter to help you because bears move so much in the spring when they're feeding. The other method I like to talk about is, and there's nothing wrong with, Southwest Oregon, coastal, Eastern Oregon, doesn't really matter. If you can't find like a clear cut or open area, then, bears sure do like to use roads, especially if it's a closed road or trails. And if you're out there in an area that you don't have a lot of area to spot, to be glassing, then certainly can't hurt to do a little investigating out there and find some sign and see if you can't sit up on a roadway or some pathway where they're going to come through. Are you hearing me okay, Joel?
Yeah, you're good, man. I've got no issues.
Okay, cool. So anyway, let's talk about,
I am going to pause you for a quick second. A few more people have come in, so just wanted to say thanks to all those people for joining, of course. And if they missed the beginning, we'll probably post this as a recording on our Instagram as well, so people can catch up with it. But this is Scott Napoli. I hope I pronounced your last name right. I always just sort of guessed on that.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, he of course. Hey, Asha.
Hi, Asha.
Yeah, my buddy Brian joined as well. But so Scott's going over kind of bear hunting, spring bear hunting, figuring out kind of where to find them, and what what kind of habitat they live in. Scott, I had a quick question for you. Actually, you mentioned they drop a lot of scat around their beds, but are they bedding in specific areas, or is it like they have one bed, two beds, four beds? What's their range like on that? I mean, is it like like a deer's like a half mile to a mile radius type thing, and that's it?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the food source. So if there's a lot of food in one area, then I think they're going to hang there for a while. And then if there's not, if it depletes itself, they eat it all, then they're going to move on and find a bed somewhere, or make a bed somewhere else. My experience is that they usually do. They are lazy enough that they don't want to go far from their bed when they need to go to the bathroom if they're not ready to get up. On the other hand, though, I have also come across spots in the woods where a bear clearly liked one spot to poop and there was no bed there. He always came back to the same spot. So, they can be a creature of habit too. So, but, it's not like I find a lot of bear beds, but I have found them before, and generally they've had poop all around them if they were active. I was getting into the next method of hunting bears, and that would be predator calling for bears. And the one thing about predator calling for bears, it's a little different than predator calling for any other predator. But ideally, you would want to spot a bear first. And I say that because bears are really unpredictable on how they're going to respond to a predator call. There's one of three things they're going to do. One is they're just going to run away because you scared them with the noise, or they may just totally ignore you and just continue doing what they've been doing. The other thing, of course, is they're going to come to your call. So, use high-pitched sounds with a lot of urgency, like a dying rabbit or elk calf in distress call. And the one thing about calling bears, though, that's different than calling coyotes and stuff, is that you want to continually call without stopping. It's been shown that if you stop calling like you would for a coyote for a couple minutes, that bears can lose interest just like that and start walking away. And I've had this experience in Snake River Canyon. I was coming up out of there one time hunting, and I was coming up some thick stuff on a trail and came across a fresh pile, and then a few feet later spooked a bear, and it ran across this draw, which wasn't very deep, but it was brushy. So I immediately stopped, got my rabbit call and my mouth call, and I started blowing on that thing, and I literally blew until I literally could not blow anymore into that thing. And I kept its interest because I kept seeing it pop its head up over the brush, and ultimately it finally came in. I shot it like 30 yards. So it does work. And the one thing you want to do if you do set up, whether you see a bear or not, and there's a lot of guys that cold call bears, which what I mean by cold calling is they go in without seeing a bear and they start calling. But generally what you want to do if you're cold calling is to actually look for some sign, or you have, some idea that there's bears in that area. So if you're finding a lot of fresh scat and stuff, then it's a good place to cold call and set up. But when you do that, though, whether you see one or not, you want to try and make it easy for them to get to you. So kind of predict where they're going to come from, or if you see the bear, you're going to know where it's coming from. Don't make it difficult where they've got to go around rock cliffs or thick stuff. You know, they're going to want to come in easy. So that's something to think about when you set up. Of course, when you're calling any predator, especially lions and bears, you know, it can be dangerous, especially if you're using a mouth call. I don't worry so much about bears as I do lions because they're just so stealthy and they're so visual and they see movement and you're making the sound there. You are what it sounds like. And so you want to watch your back. If you got another buddy, go back to back when you're calling, or if you're by yourself, you know, I just pick a good sized tree with a lot of stuff behind me that's going to, you know, restrict an animal from coming in behind me. So something to think about if you're going to do any predator calling. And you might call in a line too, so have that tag because you never can tell. I'll talk a little bit about field judging. What I look for first is I look at the head, and if you're looking at a bear and you see ears that are on top of the head, so they're kind of pointed up, then that's generally a younger bear. When you find that bear that has a big blocky head with ears that are kind of on the side of his head, then you're looking at a pretty mature bear. Other things to look for if you're trying to tell the difference between a sow or boar, you know, sows can get really big too, but generally their head is not going to be as big as it should be proportionate to their body. So they're real big in the back end and then they kind of taper to the head, so they kind of got that pear shape versus a big boar. He's going to have super wide shoulders, big chest, big head, and you'll be able to see the difference when you see him. But that's one way to tell. And then another thing to look at is the legs. If you're looking at a bear that has legs that from the shoulder down to the wrist taper drastically, then you're probably looking at a younger bear. But if you have a bear that is the width of that shoulder is pretty much the width of that elbow and it's just a big log sticking down, most likely you're looking at a mature bear. The other thing about big boars is if you're watching a bear, and I've seen this on my trail camps too, so if you got a bear that you're watching, all of a sudden it runs away, you don't know why, take the time to actually just look around and wait, because a lot of times it's a big boar that comes in. When those big dominant bears come in, the rest of the bears take off, get up and dodge. They don't want to mess with them. And so that's something to look for. When big bears walk, they walk pretty slow. They just kind of got a little swagger to them. Their shoulders are so wide and their head's so big, you know, it's almost like they got to throw their front leg forward when they walk. And so, and sometimes you'll see one that doesn't even look like hardly has legs because they're so big. So that's pretty much what I wanted to throw out for some basics. Obviously, patience is a really important trait to have when you're bear hunting, but also persistence. When I talk about, you know, actually being persistent enough to actually be patient, but also persistent when you go after your bear and commit to going after your bear. You know, like I said, when you get there and your bear's not where it was, you know, don't give up. You've already committed, and persistence usually pays off. The most important thing I'd like to talk about to really end this off with is confirm all your shots. And I've got several examples. I'll tell you one real quick. I was going after a blonde bear, and I got in on it. It was not where it was supposed to be. My buddy didn't see where it went, so I made a decision, went one direction, caught up with it, took a shot at it about 250 yards, felt like a good shot, but it ran into the brush right next to where it was, and simultaneously ran out the other end of it. Was probably maybe a 100-yard swath of brush, and ran up the hill and over and out. And a lot of people would probably look at that and go, oh, well, I mean, he clearly wasn't wounded. It was doing fine. But I told my buddy, I said, you know, I always confirm my shots. And so whether it involves a bunch of extra work, which it usually does, especially in Hell's Canyon, if any of you have been there, I had to go down to the bottom, back up the other side, got over there, and sure enough, there's a great trail of blood 25 yards in. There's my bear. So I figured it must have been a couple older siblings hanging together because they're exact same color, bleach blonde, and exact same size. I wouldn't have got my very first mountain lion if I wouldn't have spent over 2 hours trying to confirm my shots. And that's, long story short, it ended up being a record mountain lion for Oregon, my first one. And it was all because I was trying to find blood. I was trying to find tracks. I went down in the next canyon where there was some snow, tracks coming in, nothing coming out. So I basically laid in the same spot, and I was like 6 feet from it numerous times before I actually finally flushed it out and had broke its back leg. And he turned around and came at me, which was an adrenaline rush, but I ended up getting him. So, yeah, I just think confirming your shots and being an ethical hunter, all hunters as we are, we should be, doing the ethical and right thing, whether anybody's watching or not. And of course, a lot of anti-hunters out there, I'm sure, would have a hard time believing that we actually care about animals. So I'm sure that there's none of us out there that want to wound an animal and see it suffer. So that's my final tip. So, anybody have any questions?
Oh, we got lots of questions.
Okay. Figured maybe you're writing some down.
Oh, I've been
Let's do it.
Yeah, I've been writing like mad. Easier than trying to scroll back. But first off, I just want you to say what a male bear is called.
Hold on, you're breaking up.
What is a male bear called?
A boar.
Bingo! Cheers.
I thought I said that.
You didn't see that in the comments. We said drink every time Scott says boar. So.
Oh, nice. I wish I'd have known that. I would have drank a few times.
Yeah, it's all right. It's all right. So yeah, there's a lot of questions, and thank you everyone for joining. First off, again, but so one question quickly was, or kind of a thought was, what tricks do you have for spotting bear, and kind of how far do they? Well, kind of what I mentioned before, but how far do they range? But what maybe are some tips you have for when you're out there glassing for bear, what you're looking for?
It's funny because there's a lot of things out there that really would trick your mind, and it happens to me too. I don't really have an answer as far as like, avoiding looking at burnt stumps that look like a bear. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff out there that it's just, I mean, really, it's just a matter of being super patient and staying on the glass. And sometimes you're going to be looking at the same spot numerous times, and then all of a sudden you may see just a slight movement, and all of a sudden you're looking at a bear, and maybe it was there the whole time. But it's really about just being persistent and being patient and staying on the glass, because I mean it gets tiring after a while if you sit there for hours looking through the set of binoculars and you don't think you're seeing anything. But I would say take it slow. Really study an area through your binoculars. Don't do a lot of scanning. I mean, there's nothing wrong with scanning, but really take the time to look at an area and really confirm what you're looking at. And the time you take, oftentimes we'll get a bear. You'll get some movement, and then all of a sudden you're looking at a bear, whereas you might have been looking at it when you're scanning and didn't even notice.
Cool. And kind of a follow-up to that, or continue, I think that it kind of builds on what you were saying, is that Andy had asked, the process for breaking down a new area. So I assume he's talking about glassing, or maybe he's just talking even about coming into a new area, but that's a good question kind of as a follow-up to that glassing question.
Yeah, and I kind of mentioned a little bit about that earlier as far as like pre-scouting. If you can't go into an area pre-scout, that's where your research at home might pay off by calling the local biologists or calling hunters that that have been to that area. But other than that, I mean, just going there and, like I said, this time of year, looking for those open grassy slopes where there's good grass and plant life growing, and generally, you're looking at patches of it that are going to have some cover nearby, because those bears, they like to get in their cover for a nap and stuff, and not stay in the wide open stuff. I mean, you will find them wide open stuff sometimes, but they're usually moving. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, just getting some knowledge from other people is a good start if you can't go there yourself.
And if you come into an area, Scott, and you find bear, or if you get on a bear, if you spook them, we had a couple guys ask, if you spook them, are they blown out, so to speak? Do you have to go somewhere else, or will they return to that area?
That's a good question. I think I've done both. I've spooked bears that, well, I take that back. It seems like some of the bears I've seen that were on the run are already kind of spooked. But yeah, I mean, I've spooked bears that just kept running. But that example I gave you about the bear I spooked and called back in, it didn't go very far and it came back. So I think like where I go in Hell's Canyon, they don't go very far if you spook them. They've got enough cover and stuff to go into that I think you're not going to have to go to a whole nother area. And there's generally usually more than one bear in a canyon, so especially if the food source is there.
And I heard you say call them in. What kind of predator call are you using? Or what kind of call are you using? I shouldn't say predator call, but what kind of...
That one I talked about, I was just using a mouth call, and it was I think it was a jackrabbit in distress call.
Do they mostly respond to animals in distress then? Is that kind of the primary call?
Yeah, although there's a guy in New Hampshire that builds wildlife technology calls who always tells me that using the same animal sounds is a good way to call in the same animal. So I have tried using like bear cubs in distress, because you'll get those males that will come in and want to kill them, just like coyotes do with pups in distress. But I haven't had any luck with that yet. But I haven't, spotted a bear and then tried that call either. So, it's always worth a try. But my experience has just been with the animals in distress, pretty much rabbits or deer, elk.
Okay. And then I know a lot of, there was a couple of us who were really fascinated about the fact that you were mentioning different color phase bears, which of course is kind of a cool thing that maybe some people don't know about. So you might want to talk about that a little bit. But we also had a couple people ask where to find which, like how do you find a blonde bear or a cinnamon bear versus a black bear?
Well, I can tell you that there are different color phases. The further east you go, and that's why I go to Snake River Canyon a lot and Hell's Canyon. There's a lot. I rarely see black ones over there. It's usually cinnamon, chocolate, blondes, but I have seen, on the west side of the Cascades, I've also seen some really strange bears, like one that looked like a skunk, had a big white stripe down its back, and it actually had offspring with the same markings. But even Central Oregon, you've got some color phases going on. I think the general rule, though, is the further east you go, the more color phase you're going to find. That's why a lot of guys actually far eastern Oregon is for the color.
Yeah, and I personally, just from having hunted in Snake Unit, I would agree with you. Although, ironically, last fall I went with Dominic and Asha, and we saw 3 black bear, and it was just sort of like, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah,
and I've seen black bear over there with cubs that were different colors.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Another good question that was asked, actually, I think is really important, actually, is what about the different periods of spring hunting, like early versus late spring, and then even spring versus fall hunting for bear? Is there any difference in strategies, or is it basically the same? What do you recommend as far as someone who's getting into bear hunting? When's the best time to go?
There's some similarities. I'm going to say the word boar because I need a drink. What was the first part of that question? Because I got sidetracked on the fall and spring.
Yeah, so basically, like, first off, that question was, is there a difference between, early spring and late spring hunting? And then how does that compare spring to fall? And then I kind of added on to that, like, is there a best season that you recommend? Like, I mean, if you're talking someone who's never bear hunted before, are you going to tell them to go spring or fall or,
Well, I'm going to tell them to go spring and fall. But
we get lots of tags.
When it comes to, like, I'm pretty much going late spring. I usually do when I go far east because of the snow drifts we always run into. It really is hard to get into that higher country. We're up at like 7,500 feet, and it's usually the third week of May, and even then I've had trouble getting in there to Hell's Canyon and some of those areas just because of the snow drifts. And so the bears have probably been out for a while. There's some guys that'll go in with tracks on side-by-sides or snowmobiles even to go after those bears earlier, but I don't know that. I think later might be better anyway. Just for, I think you have a better chance of more bears being out of hibernation over there, especially in the east. Now, over here, it might be a little different in Central Oregon, or it might be different in Western Oregon. You might go earlier. It really depends on the growth of their food source. So if you're getting a lot of sunshine and good weather, they're going to be out. And then when it comes to fall, it's different in the sense that it's just a different food source. You're going to have to go to probably a different area, quite possibly, depending on where you're at, to look for those bears. I mean, berries are a big hit in the fall. Even like the west side, there's a lot of manzanita, and they'll eat those manzanita berries too. And so I've found bears in old clear cuts that are overgrown with that stuff. And oftentimes there's more than one hanging out in that area. So it's really all about just getting out there and finding your sign, and then setting up on some of these places for those bears to come back and get their food.
Yeah, and I think that there was a question just asked by Colin 37, and I think it kind of ties into this, and you kind of touched on it before, but maybe you can just kind of briefly touch on it. They said, how far does a spring bear typically travel at night? If spotted in the evening, will it be in the general area in the morning? I mean, I guess I would think it would depend on maybe food sources and things like that, as well as the rut.
Yeah, it does for sure. I mean, there's no definitive answer for that. There's going to be your bears that if they're not being intimidated by a dominant male or something, they're going to be in the same area. If that food source is there, and it's usually more than one bear in these areas where there's a lot of good food. So, but of course, there's probably going to be a few that are pushed out. But I think in general, I think they stay pretty close to their food source unless they get just a extreme amount of pressure. Then you're going to force them to move farther. But I don't see that happening very often.
Okay. And tying to that food and their movements, I mean, is there much difference between coastal and east side bears, or are they basically all the same in the sense of they're just following both their gut and the rut?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think they're all kind of lazy, so they just want to eat. And in the fall, they're eating a lot. I mean, they're eating a lot in the spring too, because they've been, a lot of them have been hibernating. But in the fall, they're really trying to build up that fat for the winter, and so they're going to be out a lot. And I find, that early evenings are really good in the fall because they're wanting to get as much food as they can. If you have a good food source somewhere, and you're seeing a lot of bear sign, then you got a good opportunity to get a bear in the fall that way too.
Do you think there's much difference in the meat as far as from a hunting perspective from spring to fall? Is there one season you think tastes better, or it doesn't matter?
I mean, you would think that spring probably tastes better because it's just like cows eating grass, but I really haven't noticed a difference in bears that I've shot in the spring versus bears I've shot in the fall. I've had a lot of people, excuse me, tell me that they've tried bear meat and they didn't like it. Well, all I can say is that it's probably two things. One is in the way it was processed as far as the care and time that somebody took to actually cut their meat up. I do my own for that reason, because I want to know that I'm getting the best meat I can get. And with bears, you really want to cut out that fat as best you can, because a lot of times that's what's going to make your meat taste rancid. And then, yeah, I really have not. I've had, old boars that were 12 years old and they tasted fine. So I think it's a lot about how you take care of your meat, and then of course how you cook it too. And I've done a lot of different stuff with bears. I've done canned bear meat. I've done slow cooker, on the grill, jerky, sausage. And it's all good. And steaks,
What would you say it tastes like if someone has never had bear before?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, it's easy for me to tell people that it's easy to tell people that mountain lion is just the other white meat. It's kind of like a pork, because it really is. But bear is a little different. I don't know. It's you can't say it's like beef, but it is a dark meat. So I don't know. It's really hard to tell somebody how it tastes.
Okay, I was just kind of curious if you had a way to describe that. We did have a question just pop up, and then I'll come to some of the other ones that I wrote down. But do bear tend to avoid bad weather like deer or elk? Which actually is funny, because I think black-tailed deer love bad weather, mule deer hate bad weather. But what is your perspective on bear and bad weather?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's like humans. We all have different personalities and we all have different tolerances, and I think bears are the same way. I think some maybe do avoid it and maybe some don't. That's a tough question. I don't really know the answer to that one. And, you know, we've had, when we're over there hunting in the spring, we've had snowstorms and stuff. And, you know, it does seem kind of like maybe they're not out as much as they would be if it wasn't snowing. So it could be that they try to avoid it. But if it, you know, if it's a short-term thing, I think if it's a long-term thing, they're going to come out eventually. They're going to get hungry.
Okay. And can you sex a bear from a distance, or do you think it's just like impossible? You have to be up close unless they have cubs, obviously.
I don't think it's impossible. I think, like I was saying, that your sows have more of a kind of a pear shape, so they're big, their back end's big. Then as it gets to their head, their head's a little smaller than their proportionally to their body, so they got kind of that pear shape going on. Whereas a big boar, you're really not going to see that because they have such wide shoulders and big heads. I think there's, you know, you have a good, that's a good way to actually look at a boar and a sow and be able to determine if you're looking at a boar. And like I said, those boars, they act like they are the king. They just have no fear of anything. The way they walk, they just kind of swagger. They're not real fast. And they just, and like I said, watch the other bears. If there's other bears around, they're going to avoid them. That's a good way to know when a boar is around.
Good to know. And then there was a really good question. Well, that's true. You did just say boar 3 times, so I guess we better. You know. Whew. Oh, I'm gonna have a hard day at work tomorrow. So actually, there was a good question earlier from John. Was and maybe you can talk about shot placement on a bear, because I'm just like John. I've heard a lot of things as to where to shoot them, but you know, I mean, I can infer my own stuff, but I'd rather just hear what your thoughts are on that.
Shot placement is critical. I will tell you that I've shot two out of three of my record book bears. I actually shot with a 22-250, and one didn't take. I mean, barely took a step and dropped. And it's really all about shot placement. You know, pretty much when you shoot anything, shot placement is pretty critical. As far as like where, you know, I like to try to avoid the shoulders on those things because they are a tough animal. And my worst nightmare was a huge blonde bear that I shot, and I found out later that my scope was kind of bent underneath the ring, so I couldn't tell. And I hit a bear, and I think I hit it in the shoulder. It went right back down into the canyon of Snake River, and I spent 7.5 hours looking for it. I found 1 drop of blood. So it must have not been a very good shot, obviously. But yeah, you want, I mean, obviously you're trying to get to the vitals. And I don't take headshots on anything. That's just one thing I don't do. There's guys that tell me, you know, they shoot their deer in the head and that kind of stuff. But I don't know. That to me is just too risky, and I'm not that confident with my shooting that I'm going to place a good shot on a deer's or even a bear's brain, as big as it is. Plus, I want to keep the skull anyway. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just going for the heart and the lungs and trying to avoid that shoulder. So I'm looking for that front, that leg, the front leg that the side I'm shooting on is going forward and not backwards. So, you know, if it's a bear walking, you want to make sure you take the right opportunity to make that good shot. You don't want that legs coming back and end up hitting the shoulder because his leg's back.
I've heard their heart's a little further forward. This is me. I mean, just I've heard their heart's a little further forward than people think, as far as like a deer or an elk. Do you find that's the case, or like aiming?
Yeah,
like...
I mean it's not. Yeah, I don't think it's quite the same as a deer or an elk, but you know, if you can get that bullet in there where the heart or the lungs, you know, in that range, you're going to put that bear down. You know, they're tough. They are tough. They may go a little ways, but generally you're not going to go very far if you get a good shot. So I would recommend people just go online and look at a diagram of the vitals on a bear, and it'll give you a good idea of exactly where they're placed, and how to avoid that front shoulder when you're trying to shoot a good shot.
Okay. And is that same for archery then? Because I imagine most people are rifle hunting, but there's definitely some, you know, die in the wool archery hunters out there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a lot of archers that have shot bear. I mean, I know a few. I won't name them, but a friend of mine has shot 2 bears with his bow and arrow, and they went up trees and died. Mm. And created quite the dilemma for trying to get a bear out of a big tree that's died. And I'm not sure why that is, if it was just, if it was bad shot placement or if it just, wasn't enough to put it down. Because like I said, they are tough. They can go a lot farther than you would think they would go after being shot.
Is it as far as considered like a thick-skinned versus thin-skinned animal, the CP2, CP3 stuff? Do you know what they are on that classification? I honestly don't, so I just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I've skinned enough of them that their hide's pretty tough, pretty thick. But I really don't know what the classification is.
Okay. If you get a bear down and you skin it, is there something they should do with the skin straight away before they, like if they're not going to get it to the taxidermist tomorrow, what do they do?
I like to take, I'll go to the feed store and buy hay salt. It's, you don't want to take your regular table salt, and hay salt's a lot cheaper anyway because you're going to want a big bag of it. So I usually take salt with me. I'll salt the hide down. If you don't have salt, hopefully you're high enough up in the mountains that it's cold enough at night, and maybe even have some snow around that you can use for something to cool that hide down. But I generally take salt with me just to be safe and salt it down because you're going to have a lot of fat on that hide before you get it fleshed.
Cool, thank you. There was a question that came in fairly late that said when there's activity around the area, such as logging, I'm guessing also like hiking, things like that, will they avoid that area for a long time, or do they move in back as soon as there isn't any activity? And how long till they come back to an area if they get pushed off it? Or do they?
That's a good question. I really don't know if I have a definitive answer for that because I think a lot of it has to do with the bear, the individual bear. There's probably some that tolerate the logging going on nearby. As long as they're not getting, pushed around and there's a food source around, I think they'd stick around. Some of them, I'm not saying all of them, but like I said, I think different bears have different personalities and different ways of handling things. And, another one might, go away and not come back. But I really don't know. It's really hard to say what each bear would do under those circumstances. But I do think that, you look at deer. I mean, a lot of times there's deer around when they are logging. And they're around because a lot of times because those trees that are coming down are bringing food with them. They're munching on the lichens and everything that are in those trees once they're laying on the ground. So it might be the same for a bear. They might actually stick around, and when everybody leaves for the night, they come in there and start feeding.
That's great. I mean, that's most of the questions. I don't know. I mean, we can see if someone else chimes in right now. I guess I would ask you if you were going to tell someone to start bear hunting, like, encourage them, because you've done it a lot, is kind of a two-part question is why would you encourage them? They might say like, well, why should I start bear hunting? And then what's the very first most important thing they would need to do to get started in bear hunting if they've never done it before? So why and how?
So I've mentored a few people bear hunting and helped them get their first bear. Why? I think because I think I mean you look at our ungulates and how the deer are suffering across our state. I mean, I hear a lot of hunters complain about cougars and bears and all these predators, but a lot of them aren't doing anything about it to put their part in to help curb, the population. So I encourage people to predator hunt. It's just another tool. ODFW can't handle it all by themselves. So I think as hunters, and it brings another opportunity for hunting, a lot of times when you're not hunting anything else. So, and as far as a first-time hunter, I think if you don't have a mentor with you or somebody that's experienced to take you and help you guide you through your hunt, I would certainly make sure that you do talk to some experienced bear hunters and make sure that you know what you're doing before you go out there. Did you ask me like the main thing they would need to have for their first bear hunt?
Well, I mean, it's really what you would suggest to them. And actually, I see. I mean, as far as how getting started, I guess my point was only like if someone never had done it before, they may not even know where to go or anything. But I mean, you kind of covered that with some of the location tips. But And I did see a question come in, so I'm going to tangent over actually to Hunt Fish Ferment said, how would you set up a remote call versus a mouth call?
So that's a great question because so he's talking about digital callers that you can set away from your body, basically. So you're not putting the call in your mouth, and you're broadcasting that sound away from you. I typically keep it fairly close. It really depends on the terrain that you're setting up in, and the advantage of that is your sound is in a different location. So if an animal's pinpointing that location, there's not any movement there because you're not there. So it gives you a little leeway to move just a little bit if you need to. It also protects you from being attacked because you did move. But as far as setting up, it really is location to location. And when you're setting up, you're trying, like I said, you're trying to set up to make it easy for them to come into you. So if you have for example, an area that you think a bear is in, then just look for that easy path for them to get to your call and then set it up. And it doesn't have to be 100 yards away or anything like that. I mean, I generally have my caller maybe 30 yards from me, sometimes less. I just like to be able to see it and have it close to me, just because I think it gives me the opportunity for that animal to show in areas that I'm looking to shoot at.
Cool. Yeah, and Kevin Brown puts on, he says, great point on elk hunters who complain about predators. I'm going to use that one. So there's a little bit of a pub for you.
Well, it's true. It's true. I mean, we as hunters need to do our part too. And, with cougar season being open year round, why not get out there? You can be out there in the summertime hunting, and when you're not hunting anything else. Same with bears. Now we can take 3 bears a year in Oregon. So you can take 2 in the fall now and 1 in the spring. So there's, plenty of opportunity, and, plenty of opportunity to stock your freezer with meat too.
Yeah, you just got another compliment saying, can this be a master class? I'm so into this. So you might end up.
Thank you. I like that one.
Yeah, you might have to make this a master class now and teach people how to become bear hunters. Scott's been doing this a long time, guys. Even when I met him.
Actually, I haven't been doing it that long. I mean, when I was younger, I remember the first bear I ever shot at, and I didn't know what I was doing. I think I hit it in the shoulder, and it was a 30-30. And from that time on, I got rid of my 30-30 and bought a 30-06. Figured that was my problem, but I was pretty young then. And I really got serious about predator hunting, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. And have gotten more into the bears and the lions, and I like the big predators. Although I like to call anything in, really, but it's just fun.
Great.
And I'm doing
and my buddy Brian kind of he lives in Washington. I know that for a fact. So he exclaimed, "No draws," and so I responded, Oregon fall is OTC, and obviously we get 2 tags in the fall, so that's kind of a nice bonus there. So, yeah, I don't see any other questions. We have about 8 minutes left, and these do shut off at an hour, just so everyone knows. So this will kind of just sort of close out. Teresa is sending love and information, saying great information. But is there anything else you wanted to round out with, Scott? Or
yeah, I mean, if you have the opportunity to take a kid out hunting, man, I really encourage you to do it. It's really, I started doing some of that a couple years ago, and it's really satisfying to me to get a new hunter out there and have them be successful, especially one that doesn't know anything about hunting, never shot a gun before, that kind of stuff. And this last year I took one of my neighbors out. He's in his 40s, and he's always been a fisherman, and he wanted to learn how to hunt. So I took him out deer hunting, and it was great to be out there with somebody that is new and see how they're learning, how they're being aware of their surroundings and how they're looking for sign. And it's just it's rewarding to actually take somebody out and teach them how to actually live in the outdoors and actually be successful in harvesting an animal and then processing the meat and taking that home to their family. So I would encourage anybody that has the opportunity to take a kid or an adult out hunting to certainly take that opportunity and do it.
Cool.
It's very rewarding.
Yeah, and Threisiger says would love to see this again with lions next time. So we may have to call you back in just to do a whole
I'm
top.
all about that. I
I
love
know
doing
you are.
that.
I know you are. I know you are. So hey, before we go though, definitely, what's a male bear called again?
A boar, boar,
Oh,
boar,
boy.
boar. Cheers.
But yeah,
Been real.
we really appreciate your knowledge and your experience, Scott, and willing to come online and kind of chat this through, especially since a lot of us are kind of stuck with shelter in place. And I just hope everyone's staying safe and as sane as they can, and just getting excited to get out for bear hunting and everything else, of course, too. I mean, it seems like things are lightening up, but you never know what's going to happen. So. You're getting lots of
Yep.
thanks on the comments. Thanks, great stuff, really interesting, etc. So thanks a lot, Scott.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's been my pleasure.
All right, well, we're going to go ahead and click the end on this, guys, but keep an eye out for any updates and any further future of these Instagram lives. Thank you again, Scott. Really appreciate it, guys. Everyone have
All
a
right.
safe and
Thanks,
great.
Joel. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.